Welcome back to the Fantasy Draft Room. I'm Cody Smith at Cody Smith TFDR on X. You can find me over there if you want to follow along on anything else that I do. But today, the Philadelphia Eagles offensive projections for 2025. This video may have a couple of pauses in it. I'm trying to get this one in while watching the Home Run Derby, and apologies for the late night drop on this one. Still committing to the 32 days, 32 teams for projections, but I got a little bit caught up this weekend with two fantasy football drafts, a startup draft, and Scott Fish Bowl. So getting this one out to you still on the day of, but very late at night. So apologies about that. But let's get into this team right away. The Philadelphia Eagles will start it off as we normally do with the offensive historicals. Looking back over the last 3 years, we do have a little bit of a change on this team. Nick Sirianni still being the head coach, obviously, but Kevin Patullo coming in as the offensive coordinator as Kellen Moore has now left the team. So looking at the 3-year average for the Philadelphia Eagles, 516 passing attempts, 558 rushes, 388 of those going to the running back, 74 running back targets, 316 to the wide receiver, and 92 to the tight end. If we're looking at any massive swings, changes from year to year, obviously last year they rushed the ball a ton, and a lot of that is coming from the fact that they were up in a lot of games. They didn't rush the ball much, or they rushed the ball a lot in the fourth quarter, and so we saw that RB rush share, especially with the addition of Saquon Barkley as well, jump from 344 to 453 RB rushing attempts. The total number of rushes also jumped from 510 to 621. Wide receiver targets dropped from 336 to 261. Tight end targets dropped as well. So basically, this was just a full, not a philosophical change, but a change that was kind of necessary for this team to operate as efficiently as it did. And just because of how good the team was, this is how the team operated. So I don't think we'll see exactly this type of production again, but this is how this team wants to operate whenever it's at its best and greatest. So we can now get into the start with Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts, we're going to start off with that passing attempts number for the last couple of years. Last year, obviously, one of the lowest seasons that he's had, 361 passing attempts in 15 games. That would have averaged out at a 17-game pace of 409 passing attempts on the year. The year before, though, 538. And in 2022, in 15 games, 460. And if we look at that 3-year average again, that number was up at 516 all the way down to 448 last year. So if we're looking at it for 2025, I had him coming in at 487, much closer to that 500 number than he was in 2024. Completion percentage, I have him coming in at 67.15%. Last 3 years for completion percentage for Jalen Hurts has been 66, 65, and 68.7 last year. So I think this number just drops a little bit, coming in at that 67.15. For the yards, I have him statted out at 3,750, yards per attempt at 7.7. His yards per attempt over the last 3 years, 8, 7.2, and 8. So just right below that 8 average that he put up in 2022 and 2024, but higher than 2023. For his yards per completion, I have it at 11.4. 11.4 would just be a little bit lower than it was last year at 11.7, but higher than in 2023 whenever he was at 11. Career average is 11.8, so just a tick below the career average for him. 22 touchdowns on that and 9 interceptions. If we look at his touchdowns over the past 3 years, 22 and 22 on that 15 games, 23 and 17 games in 23, and 18 last year. So the 22 number feels pretty good. The 9 interceptions, we're not going to worry about too much, but last year he was at 5, the year before at 15. So that kind of comes in as a middling mark for Jalen Hurts over the course of his career. The really big thing, obviously, with Jalen Hurts, especially for the fantasy side of things, is he's coming in here at the number 4 quarterback overall in fantasy points per game, is that rushing ability. And that's 165 rushes, which is extremely high for any quarterback, but definitely up there with the top of the league. And so Jalen Hurts, if we're looking at the rushing attempts that he's had the last 3 years, that is a 165 in 2022 in that 15 games, 150 in 15 games in 2024, and 157 in 2023. So the 165 higher than he's done at any point in his career, I believe. That would be the highest rushing total for Jalen Hurts. No, he had 165 in that 2022 year. So right at that, but that was in 15 games. I think he can hit 165 in 17 games in 2025. 663 yards comes from the 4.02 yards per attempt average that you're coming in at 4.6 for the course of Jalen Hurts' career. Last 3 years, he was at 4.6, 3.9, and 4.2. So a pretty good average over those last 3 years to come in at 4.02 for the 11 touchdowns. Last year, he was at 18 touchdowns, 22 in 2022, and 23 in 2023. So this number is definitely low for Jalen Hurts. I think that that's just because of a little bit of a Saquon Barkley. Honestly, this could probably go up a little bit. I would want this number probably closer to the 15 touchdown mark. Is you expect Saquon Barkley to still have a lot of those touchdowns. But if you look at last year, even whenever Saquon Barkley did come in, and we see that number drop from the 22, 23 all the way down to 18, a lot of those, we've all seen the stat about how many 1-yard touchdowns the Philadelphia Eagles had, and the tush push obviously isn't going away. But I do think the 11 number is low here as I'm just looking at it in my sheet. I should honestly probably put that up closer to 13, 14, 15 and really be comfortable with that number there. So that will probably elevate Jalen Hurts to my quarterback 3 in fantasy for the 2025 projections. And I did take a break just to update that number of the rushing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts, and that actually elevated him up to my quarterback 2 in points per game rank for Jalen Hurts. So love to see that. We can now get into the running back room, and it's going to be led by Saquon Barkley. Obviously, 394 total rushes on the ground for this room. It's at 388 for the last 3-year average, but 453 last year. So that's definitely a step down, but we saw this team just be so efficient on the ground and use that running game so much, especially in the later parts of the game, that I do think it's just natural regression to have this team take a step down and Saquon Barkley himself take a step down from putting up 2,000 yards on the ground and leading it both with attempts and yards per game last year. So we bring that down a little bit. If we look back at the last 3 years for Saquon, he hasn't played 17 games ever, actually. So this should be one of the candidates that could potentially be an under 17 game pace. But last year we were getting a little bit of rest in there. And I think we've gotten that a couple of other times in his career. So for the last 3 years, 295 attempts in 16 games, 247 and 14, and 345 last year in only 16 games. So I have him coming in here at 296 rushes for the team, resulting in 1609 yards, which is 5.44 yards per attempt. If we look back at last year, obviously he's going to see a jump playing behind this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line comparatively to what he had to deal with the New York Giants. So the last 3 years was 4.4, 3.9, and then that jump up to 5.8 yards per attempt last year in 2024. So I have that dropping down a little bit, but still a ridiculous 5.44 yards per attempt for a running back is incredibly good, resulting in that 1609 number and 15 touchdowns on the ground. Last year, Saquon Barkley put up 13 touchdowns. So we bring down Jalen Hurts a little bit. We bring up Saquon Barkley a little bit more. Some of those 1-yard line touchdowns get a little bit more given to Saquon Barkley, and we result in 30 touchdowns on the ground just between the two, which is absolutely ridiculous. We'll go straight into his receiving work just so I don't have to jump back and forth between the two. And Saquon Barkley, for his receiving work, the last 3 years has put up 76 targets in 16 games, 60 and 14, and 43 last year with the Philadelphia Eagles. So a definite step down there as we play within this Philadelphia Eagles offense. I have him coming in here just a little bit higher, one higher actually, than last year over the 17-game pace at 44 targets for Saquon Barkley. And looking at his catch rate, it comes in at an even 75%. Numbers just work out like that sometimes. Catch rate over the course of his career, 73%. Last year, it was a 76% catch rate. And so 75 feels just about right, 44-33. And that's resulting in 237 yards with a 7.18 yards per reception. Yards per reception for Saquon last year was 8.4. Course of his career has been a 7.4 average. But the last 2 years before 2024 was 5.9 and 6.8. So we bring that one down just a little bit, 237 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air for Saquon. A.J. Dillon and Will Shipley, this is a room that I could definitely flip up as we get a little bit more information as we move on over here over the course of the next month through training camp as that kicks off this week. I think for the Eagles, I'm not sure. There's a little bit of a discrepancy between the teams if it's this week or next week. But regardless, we'll see as we go forward and then through the preseason games as well. For me personally, I know people have written him off completely, but I do think A.J. Dillon looks to be the RB2 here for this team. He's got the size. He's got, if you would just want first and second spell down work for Saquon at any point, I do think that would be Saquon over Will Shipley, and then Will Shipley would getting a little bit more of that passing down work or just the tertiary work as the third down running back here So I'm going to give it to A.J. Dillon for now, especially the targets I could see flipping towards a Will Shipley. But for right now, I'm going to rely on it being for A.J. Dillon at 64 rushes. If we look for the course of his career with the 64 rushes, his yards per attempt has been 4.3, 4.1, and 3.4. So he's definitely decreased and deteriorated almost every single year of his career whenever he was still at Green Bay. Obviously, not playing in 2024 is going to be a little bit of projection coming into 2025. But I have him taking a definite step back up to some of his early season production whenever he was with the Green Bay Packers, now running behind this Philadelphia Eagles O-line at a 4.19, just under 4.2 yards per attempt, resulting in 268 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. Through the air for A.J. Dillon, he's put up, we probably don't think as A.J. Dillon is much of a pass catcher, but over the last 3 years that he's played, 37 targets, 43 targets, and 28 targets. So I say he still has enough receiving ability to overtake that from Will Shipley and really be the RB2 here. Again, could change, but for right now, it's where I'm projecting it at. 15 targets for 11 catches. That's a 73.33 reception percentage. 489 yards, 8.09 yards per reception. On that yards per reception number, just because that does look a little bit high, he's averaged an 8.9 yards per reception over the course of his career. And in 2023, that number was all the way up at 10.01. So I do think that the 8.9 is realistic for A.J. Dillon and 1 receiving touchdown. Will Shipley picking up the remainder of the work, 31 carries for 114 yards at a 3.68 yards per attempt clip. Last year on his 30 carries, he was averaging a yards per attempt of 2.7. So I definitely got to bump up with it. It's just a small sample size, obviously only 1 year for Will Shipley so far, but I do have that increasing, but A.J. Dillon still being the RB2. So 114 yards, no touchdowns, and then picking up the last remaining of the targets for the running backs. That targets for the running backs coming in at 65. And if we remember, we were looking at the running back targets last year. That was 69 targets to the running back. You are increasing the passing attempts up, but I do think you could see this shift a little bit more back toward the wide receivers and the tight ends, especially if Dallas Goedert stays a little bit more healthy. We can highlight Dallas Goedert in yellow as well, just because he is under that 17 game pace, because he hasn't shown it over the course of his career over the last 3 years at least that he can play a full 17. So I have him only coming in at 14, but I do think that we can see more work going into the wide receivers and to the running backs. All right, and that'll let us get into our wide receivers, and we're really only going to talk about the main two here, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. This offense is very, very consolidated and has been for the last years that we can remember. They've just been incredibly, 1, healthy, and 2, dominant for this team. So A.J. Brown, we'll start off with him. 139 targets is where I resulted with A.J. Brown, and over the last 3 years. Last year, he only played in 13 games with 97 targets. In 2022, 145 targets in 17 games and 158 in 2023. So this number not coming in as close as those 2022, 2023 seasons, but a tick up from his pace, what would have been over the 17 games from 2024. 139 targets, the catch rate being 67.63%. Looking at A.J. Brown's catch percentage over the course of his career, he's averaged 64.2%, and he had his career high last year at 69.1. That dropped down, or actually rose, each of the last 3 years from 60 to 67 to 69%. Nice. So we come in here just a little bit below that career high average of 67.63%. That's going to result in the 94 receptions. Yards per reception for A.J. Brown, it's been 17, 13.7, 16.1. Obviously, this offense just goes on massive big play, explosive ability, and I have him coming in here at 14.64. So not as high as he has been over the course of his career in some of those explosion seasons, but definitely just a little bit under his career average of 15.8. Results in a 1,376 yards for the 8 touchdowns. The touchdowns would love them to be higher for both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, but whenever you're only throwing for 22, there's not that much to go around. So for Devonta Smith himself, I have him at 120 targets as well. Devonta Smith's targets over his first 4 years in the league, he only played 13 games as well. So they did have a little bit of that stretch there where they didn't have not concurrently, but they didn't have all the wide receivers for the first time over the course of 17 games. But 13 games last year, 89 targets, 112 targets on 16 games in 2023, and 136 in 17 games in 2022. So I'm at the 120 here. Catch percentage at 70.83%. Catch percentage over the course of his career has averaged out at 69.8%, was a really, really high number at 76.4% last year. Rose up again, same as A.J. Brown. It's rose up each of his 4 years in the league from 61 to 69 nice to 72 to 76%. So I have that coming in at 70.83%. The 11.56 yards per reception has been probably a little bit of a step down further than I'd really like to have. Devonta Smith add, I could easily see that going up a little bit as well. As A.J. Brown goes a little bit down, you could see Devonta Smith go up. He's averaged 13.0 yards per reception in his career. The last 3 years have been 12.6, 13.2, and 12.3. So the 11.56 definitely feels a little bit low. Could easily see this number bump up a little bit, which would result in Jalen Hurts' yards also going up. So the 983 yards for 7 touchdowns, a little bit low coming in at wide receiver 28. That's probably closer to a back end wide receiver 2 if we adjust that number up a little bit, but we can take a little bit of a step down from one of the most explosive offenses in the league and the 7 touchdowns to go along with it. I don't think we need to spend too much time on the Jahan Dotson, Johnny Wilson, Terrace Marshall, Arian Smith, Danny Gray, or Anias Smith, Arian Smith, Anian Smith is currently what I have in the sheet. Obviously, that is my boy out of A&M, Anias Smith. So we can get into the only tight end again that's going to matter. A really simplified, consolidated offense team. Dallas Goedert, for the 14 games that he is healthy, I have him coming in at 75 targets. Last 3 years for Dallas Goedert has been 69 targets in 12 games, 83 in 14, and 52 last year in 10 games. So that number, if you put it out to a 17-game average, I had it coming in with 75 targets. Catch rate being at 76%. Career average has been 73.3. Last year was 80.8%. The year before that was 71.1. And in 22, it was a 79.7%. So that number at 76 feels about right for a Dallas Goedert season. The 10.26 yards per attempt that we have him coming in at is just a little bit below career average. Last 3 years, he's averaged 12.8 in 22, 10 in 23, and 11.8 in 24. So that's going to result in the 585 yards and the 3 touchdowns. Again, one of those ones that you would love to put another couple of touchdowns to, but we don't really see that whenever we only have 22 to go around in the offense. So that's going to do it for the Philadelphia Eagles, recapping everything. 487 passing attempts for 327 completions, 3750 through the air, 22 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 559 rushing attempts on the ground for the team for 2,665 yards, 31 touchdowns on the ground. We already went through the passing stats. We don't need to repeat those, and that will result in 1,046 plays and 53 total touchdowns. There's your Philadelphia Eagles. Sorry again for this one coming out so late. We'll get this out tonight, though, and then we will look at probably the Washington Commanders tomorrow. Hope you all tune in. Thanks.